All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. We are your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. My name is Robert Winfree, and I am your host, per usual. What do we got this week? Well, last night, UFC on ESPN 47. That was a card. It didn't look great on paper, and, you know, for the most part, wasn't great. There were some good parts, though. There were some. I'll say this for that card. The stuff that was good was actually pretty darn good. So we will get into that. We will look ahead. This coming Saturday, UFC on ABC 5, headlined by Josh Emmett and Ilia Topuria. That's a darn good fight. So we'll give you a full preview of that. And then news. There were some fight announcements that the UFC, I'm sure, at least in part, put out because Conor McGregor did a stupid. And we'll talk. I hate talking about Conor's stupidity, but, well, here we are. So we'll talk about that and, whatever else I have written down or comes up as I'm recording. All right, before we get going, first of all, thank you as always for listening. Anything you can do to help the show, like, comment, subscribe, star rating, written review, sharing, be that in person or over the internet. Let people know about the show, point them in our direction. That's always helpful. So before we get into the show proper, today is Father's Day 2023. And just wanted to take a moment, because I know my audience here is mostly male. In fact, my hunch is all of you. Like, there's not a lot of you, but my hunch is all of you. Might be wrong, but my hunch. Certainly predominantly male. Um, Thank you to those of you who are fathers and who are good fathers. I'm going to caveat that a little bit. If you're not, then, do better, man. The world doesn't need more crappy fathers. The world needs good fathers. There's not enough. Without getting too much onto my theoretical high horse here, there's a lot of stuff out there in popular culture, television, movies, media, etc., that is not very kind to men. And if that continues to beat its way into the sort of collective unconscious, it makes things worse. And you can argue about Hollywood and television and all that crap till you're blue in the face. It's not really going to change until largely market forces demand it. Though the way things currently are going, like that, even the relationship between studio systems and the actual market is in a really weird place at the moment. If you want more on this, feel free to listen to Damn You Hollywood. We talk about it on occasion. But more specifically here, the best way to counteract that is with good real-world examples. Very little comes from I'm going to say especially raising younger men, but for the record, like, there's a reason that a giant chunk of women who have maladjusted issues claim to have daddy issues specifically. Uh, and for young men, you need good examples of what it means to be a man in the world. And whether that's a biological kid, a step kid, if you're just a sort of surrogate father figure via, again, slightly different, or a slight distance in biology, if you're, an uncle and you're trying to be a good example of what it means to be a man, or if you're, you volunteer in the community and you're I don't know, a scout leader or something similar, like whatever it happens to be. If you're out there trying to make sure that, trying to be the best that you can be, and you're trying to demonstrate what it means to be a good man, then thank you. The world needs more of you. I've been blessed with some very wonderful male people, role models in my life. My father, both of my grandfathers, my maternal and paternal ones, a couple of really awesome uncles, uh, several, again, because I grew up not only religious, but at a time when my religious group was very closely tied with the Boy Scouts, and my dad was actually big into scouting. I had some very good scout leaders. Uh, I'm eternally grateful to all of them, and just wanted to say that here. If you skipped ahead for this, I fair play to you. I can't blame you. But it's my show, and if I want to wax a little bit poetic about that, then I'm going to. So thank you for your indulgence. All right, with that out of the way, let's jump into it, shall we? Boy, I am getting more long-winded these days. All right, UFC and ESPN 47 main event. Jared Cannonier defeats Marvin Vettori via unanimous decision, 249-45, 148-46. Um, so we get to that via all three judges scored the second round 10-8 for Jared Cannonier. I did as well. Vettori got the first. They both rocked each other a little bit in the first round, but Vettori seemed to kind of do the general better work, and think I think the impact, the moment when he kind of wobbled, Cannonier was a bit more significant than the other way around. The only other round I think in question was, when was it was it 4? I think it was 4 that one of the judges gave to Vettori, and to be abundantly clear, I don't agree. But given how the first half of that round went, I don't think it's one of those weird things where there's such latitude in play for some of this stuff with the judges. When I say giving Vettori the fourth is not out of bounds, it just means that it doesn't scream incompetence or ignorance or corruption to me. I don't like it. I don't think it's correct. But I also don't think it's not incomprehensible to me. There's actually another one on this card. Yeah, somebody gave. We'll talk about the fight itself I think it was in a minute or two. But somebody gave Armen Petrosyan the second round of his fight with Christian Leroy Duncan, and I don't agree with that at all. That might be the single worst. Was it that or was it Bukowskis? No, that was the wrong one. Sorry, I disagreed with Petrosyan there, but I don't think that was wrong. Kicking everything off, I'll get to the fight itself in a second. Modestas Bukowskis and Zach Paunga. Somebody gave Bukowskis all 3 rounds, and I can't get behind that. That second round really should have gone to Paunga. And no problem with Bukowskis winning, but 30-27 for him is a bad scorecard. It's objectively worse than 48-46 for Cannonier. So, how did the fight go? Cannonier opens up southpaw. He's looking to land calf kicks more than anything else because Vettori's a southpaw, so getting the power leg kick going. Vettori just starts kind of cracking him with the left because Cannonier's defense from the southpaw stance is clearly not where it needs to be. Which is just, I mean, look, you don't learn, forgive the phrasing here, but I heard someone else say it and I like it. Learning to be bistantial is not easy, and it's actually even harder when you're fighting a southpaw. Because, which is weird. I mean, like, in theory, what's the southpaw advantage? The southpaw advantage in boxing, primarily, is that the guy fighting left-handed has spent more time knowing what to do and honing his reactions against open stance fighters than you have. There's no, it's not a magic switch, right? It's not a button you can press and suddenly you start winning. The advantage is I know what I'm doing in this position, in this body position, better than you do in the same position. That's it. That's the advantage. The irony being that actually southpaws against other southpaws struggle because they don't spend as much time fighting close stance fighters. And I think that's a little bit what happened here with Cannonier's southpaw. Because his defense was not there. He was getting hit with that power left of Vettori, and it it wobbled him at one point, but he rallied back, spent more time orthodox. He hurt Vettori a little bit. It was a pretty good first round. Second round, Cannonier is orthodox almost the entire time, but he's done a little bit of body work to this point, which has slowed Vettori a touch. And he's got a feel for the timing in this second round, and he starts bombing on Marvin Vettori. I said this in my preview that I thought Vettori. I can't remember who I picked. I might have been leaning. I think I did lean Cannonier actually. I might be wrong. If you're listening to this, you might remember better than I do. I don't recall. That's not me trying to shield myself from having to eat crow if I was wrong. If I was wrong, I was wrong. But I did say that Vettori had a head like a cinder block. Like this, he ate. Again, Jared Cannonier has power. That guy was knocking people out at heavyweight, was a power threat at light heavyweight, and has stopped more than a few guys here at middleweight. He packs a wallop. And he just dropped bombs on Marvin. He got him against the fence and punches, uppercuts, elbows, takedowns. I mean, his takedowns was like, okay, let me get on top of you and drop, again, artillery on you from top position. He landed some sick ground and pound. He's a strong guy. And he's got, again, Cannonier, big power. In this entire fight, Marvin Vettori has never been stopped with strikes, ever. He's now, like, starting to climb the list of guys who have absorbed the most significant strikes in the UFC without ever suffering a TKO loss. Number one on the list is Max Holloway. Not terribly surprising, even though Max has taken some beatings in his time, but he's never been stopped. Also on that list, we got, like, Vera. This would be Chito Vera. Who's the other guy, actually? Hang on, I will. Pedro Munoz, actually. Munoz been hit that much? Yeah, he has. So Vettori is now fourth all-time most significant strikes absorbed without getting KO'd or stopped via strikes in the UFC. I mean, the third round not quite as bad as the second. I mean, I give Marvin Vettori's corner credit. Was it? They came out like Dewey Cooper, who's his lead, told him between rounds 2 and 3, like, we can't do that again. We can't do that again. Either the ref would stop it or they would stop it. Like, you can't have another round like that. Which was correct. Like, he just couldn't have absorbed that much more damage. I want to take a quick look because now I think it was the fourth that he got. Yeah, it was the fourth that yeah, old Sal D'Amato scoring round 4 of Vettori, the semi-sentient can of Campbell's tomato soup. Maybe it was racial this time. Maybe it was D'Amato favoring the Italian. Maybe we can. Sorry, I'm mostly aware it's not the best joke in the world, but Sal D'Amato annoys me. Anyway, so yeah, it was the fourth. Again, I don't agree with that at all, but it's not the worst. It's not out of bounds, right? Like maybe that's the right way to phrase that. It didn't strike me as out of bounds. If you want the stats on this, because again, third round, Vettori starts to fight back. He has a good first couple of minutes, but then I don't know if this is I don't know if this is a leg conditioning thing with him or if it's a mental thing. But about half, again, we get to the last 2 minutes or so of the round. It's maybe been Vettori favored slightly to this point, and then Cannonier just like, all right, enough of this. Backs him up and starts bombing on him again against the fence. Vettori's footwork against pressure, especially against like serious pressure, he just kind of hangs out on the fence for periods of time here. I seem to recall Roman Dolidze had a little bit of the same kind of success against him. Maybe not quite to this degree. I don't know if it's because Cannonier, I think Cannonier's footwork is better, which is kind of what leads to him corralling him. And then Vettori just like stops moving. So Cannonier gets the third. Fourth is relatively competitive, especially to the other two rounds. I still thought Cannonier won it, but I think I did note like that was a relatively close round. It was a competitive round. Then round 5 is more Cannonier. Dude, Cannonier set records in this fight. He set the record for the most significant strikes landed in a UFC middleweight fight. So this singular performance ranks. What was it? Fourth? I think it was fourth all time in terms of significant strikes landed over the course of a UFC fight. And the irony being, if you take Max Holloway out of the equation, he becomes second only to the fight between Rob Font and I think it was Marlon Vera, where Font landed a lot. Font landed 270, I think, in that fight. But in this one, let me bring up the actual stat here. Yeah, Cannonier is officially credited as having landed 241 significant strikes. Again, that's a record for the middleweight division. You want to mess with that number, you got to go all the way down. You're getting down to like again featherweights that have that kind of output. He just unloaded artillery on that guy. And Vettori I don't know what that man's head is made of, but it should be studied. If you'll recall, Vettori got bombed on by Paulo Costa too. Like, those two guys went at it. And here, we know how hard Cannonier hits, and Vettori got hurt a couple of times, but he never went down. And it's a little shocking. The second round was the worst for Cannonier landed 82 significant strikes in that round, 94 total. Somebody the size and power of Jared Cannonier hits you 82 times, and you don't go down. That's a lot. Yeah, for the record on round 4, just very briefly, if we look at totals, Vettori technically landed more, 37 to Cannonier's 32. One takedown for Cannonier and 30 some odd seconds of control time. Again, I thought Cannonier still won the fourth, but Vettori spent the first 2 minutes and change doing some pretty decent work, so I disagree, but I'm not up in arms over it. Live, I know some people were like, how in the world did you give Vettori any round after the first? I think Rabaka Hitman Caposo did that thing. He's like, how did you do that? He rewatched round 4 and went, Okay, real time, I forgot how good Vettori's first half of that round was. Still don't think he won it, but uh, it's not it's not crazy. I think it's wrong, but I don't think it's again out of bounds. And then yeah, round five again, 49 significant strikes for Cannonier, 23 for Vettori. Just a beating. It was a fight. I mean, this was actually a fight of the night. But Jared Cannonier, when he gets rolling downhill, man, that is a scary dude. His calf kicks were working pretty good. The power difference was big. The pressure difference was big. It was John Crouch who was kind of telling him between rounds every time. Like, clearly they drilled this. What wins the fight? Footwork. So don't stand still. Don't stand in front of him. Good footwork, pressure, and violence. John Crouch is a very, very good coach. They put together something that worked. That pretty clearly worked. After the fight, Cannonier. Other people had mentioned this before. The UFC is pretty clearly leaning towards the winner of the upcoming fight between Robert Whittaker and Dricus du Plessis to get the next shot at Israel Adesanya. This performance from Cannonier, if he'd gotten the stoppage, it would have helped. Would have helped a lot. I think he's probably still behind them, whoever wins that fight, with a caveat. This was, again, this was fight of the night. This is one on my list of like potential fights of the year. This was a really good fight. With that, he doesn't leapfrog them, but if the winner of du Plessis and Whittaker is disputed, or the fight sucks, then this was enough to overcome. I think this would have been enough of a performance to overcome something like that. Again, a bad decision, a bad stoppage, or a really just terrible, terrible fight. For the record, especially if it's Whittaker. If Whittaker wins a really boring fight, I don't think Whittaker has ever won. I don't think Whittaker has been in a boring fight. Even some of the fights that aren't barn burners of his, like the second fight with Adesanya, didn't exactly set the world on fire, but I don't think it was boring. It was just super tactical, and that's not always the most exciting. But that doesn't make it. There's something of a lack of excitement does not necessarily equate to boring, which is a weird thing to say, but I hope you understand what I mean. And that's probably the closest Whittaker's come to being in a boring fight. So I don't expect that, but if he wins a just boring fight, because he's lost to Adesanya twice, that might be enough to get Cannonier over the hump. My hunch is if du Plessis wins, even if it's boring, they'll give him the shot just because he's new. That's again, Cannonier did the best that he could, short of actually stopping a guy who'd never been stopped with strikes. You couldn't have asked for much more out of Cannonier in this one. Dude set a record. That's probably it's going to be a while before that one's touched in the division. Most middleweights do not have. They either don't have the cardio, or the other guy doesn't have the chin to take that kind of abuse. These two guys fought at a pretty good clip all 5 rounds. I'm going to take my hat off to both of them in that respect. These two gentlemen came in shape and ready for 5 rounds. Tough loss for Vettori. He showed not only his chin. I'm making it sound a little bit maybe like he's a Homer Simpson type. That's just absorbing damage. It wasn't just that. A lot of this was Cannonier being clever, and it's not like Vettori had no success. He rocked Cannonier early. He found his left hand later. He landed some real. These two were jabbing each other. Uh, he had success. He was after that second round. I thought he was kind of cooked. Instead, he came back and he kept. Even though I had him losing every other round, still, it never got as bad as it did in the second again for him. And that's a real hard thing to do. If you've never been beat down like that, to then never regress to that point throughout the course of a fight, that is a heck of a thing to pull off. Uh, Vittori's still young. He's what, 29? Because Cannonier, I think, isn't Cannonier 39? Yeah, these guys are 10 years apart, and Vittori's 29. His face got messed up here. One thing about Vittori, I haven't talked about it a whole lot before because it's a weird thing to say, but Marvin Vittori will get torn up. I mean, and look, this is not that doesn't mean it's the end of your fight career. He perseveres through damage pretty darn well, but he gets marked up. And again, plenty of guys this has been true of. GSP did not wear damage especially well in the sense like how much effort do you have to put into hurting him cosmetically? Not a lot. Fedor. It didn't take a lot to get that guy to mark him up. Frankie Edgar's nose seemed to bleed every fight he was in. And if you couldn't make his nose bleed in the first round, you were in trouble. There are just some guys who mark up easier, and I think Vittori's one of those guys. His nose got busted up, cut on the bridge of the nose. Had a pretty big cut opened up under his left eye. He got marked up, man. He was wearing that damage, and he fought through it. And maybe I should find a better way to phrase that, because sometimes when I say people don't wear damage well, it means they like fall apart. That's not what I mean when it comes to Vittori in this case. I just mean he gets damaged easily. I mean, who else? Like, again, some guys just do. But it wasn't hard to damage either of the Diaz brothers actually. Pretty much throughout their careers, like you could bust them up. They didn't care, but you could do it. So it might be something Vittori has to keep in mind is how you kind of have to deal with that at some point, He's still got time, but there's some stuff he's got to start. He needs to show his level up in the near future. Like he's got to figure out a couple of things if he's gonna really make it. This could have been kind of a last stand for Cannonier. At 39, already had that loss to the champion, had the loss to Whitaker. If he'd lost here, I'm not saying he couldn't get back to the title, but at his age and with some of that baggage you're carrying around there, he needed this if he wanted to keep his title aspirations alive. So, good fight, good win for Cannonier. For a pretty lackluster card in general, and there was some good stuff. I don't mean to say that the whole card sucked. It didn't. But between a few, call it officiating issues, we'll get to them. Just kind of being a little bit long. They lost a couple of fights on this card. The big one I think that hurt everything was Hani Barcelos and Miles Johns. That fell apart like fight week. We also lost Jalga Zumagulov and Felipe Bunez. Bunez had a drug test issue. He got pulled. Zumagulov now fights Josh Vanna this coming card. We'll talk about that later. So we lost a couple of fights, and this event had some airtime to fill. And there were some of those officiating issues that kind of either prolong or in some cases really shorten some stuff. if I think back on just the fights as I look over the results and whatnot, not great, but something about the pacing of the event really turned it into a drag to watch in real time. I imagine if I could go back and just kind of rewatch, at a decent clip, it might not be that bad. And not great, but not awful either. Anyway, so that was the main event. Co-main event. Arman Saryukian defeats Joaquim Silva via TKO punches, 325 of the third. All I'm gonna give Silva credit. The first round went real bad for him. Saryukian got him down pretty quick. Got him against the fence. Started doing damage later. Just a real bad round for him. Second round, Silva gets back into the fight a little bit. They spend most of the second round on the feet. Might have been all of it. And at one point, I think I gave him the second. He pretty badly wobbles Saryukian with a left hook. Third round, Saryukian like, all right, enough of that. Got a takedown. Got Silva wall walked. Silva's get-ups were not especially impressive, and I know some of that is Saryukian's top control being just excellent. But there's still some stuff that I wasn't seeing at him in terms of setting up his wall walks or his get-ups that is a little troubling. Like, you might want to work on that. But they got up. Then Silva threw a knee. Saryukian caught it, took him down, and kind of dumped him on his head as he threw. He didn't spike him, but he landed on his. Silva landed, a good chunk of his weight went onto his head. He got hurt from that. Saryukian got on top and just elbows, hammer fist, punches until the ref says, okay, we're done here. Saryukian on the feet. This was kind of my big takeaway from this. His offense is still pretty potent. He's got decent hand speed. He's got okay power. His lead leg kicks actually are pretty dexterous. But anytime you get him going backwards, he is just not the same fighter at all if he's on the back foot versus the front foot. And his defense, especially if he's like exchanging in the pocket, his defense there is not. You need really good defense in that position. If you don't have it, if you don't have really good defense there, you want to avoid trading in that space because especially the guys who are good in that space, they have good defense and they have power in there. And if you can't hang with them in that sense, your best bet is to avoid it entirely. His pocket striking at the moment leaves a little to be desired. And that's where Silva kind of started finding him later. Saryukian's still very, very good. Post-fight, he said he wants to fight either Beneil Dariush or maybe Michael Chandler since the Conor McGregor fight looks like it's not happening. More on that later. I am okay with either of those. Here's kind of my thing about Saryukian. He's only 26. He's good. I don't mean to say otherwise. I mean, his only losses in the UFC are Islam Makhachev and Mateusz Gamrot. The Makhachev fight was, again, somewhat on short notice, and he gave Islam a pretty good fight. And then he and Gamrot just had the craziest wrestling match you'll see over 25 minutes. I think part of the issue he's going to run into is he's so good, he's not going to get the types of seasoning fights that you normally need. He's proven he can hang with some of the upper tier guys at lightweight, which means that's mostly what he's going to be fighting. Which means a lot of his development. I mean, the guy's got 23 fights. It's not like he's a green fighter. But between his young age and Yeah, maybe my issue is more with his ranking. Because he was ranked number 8, I think, coming into this. Here's the thing. Again, he has only the 2 losses and, what, 8 wins in the UFC now? Where's the 7? Yeah, this was his 7th. He's 7-2 in the UFC. His wins are as follows, and bear with me here for a second. I'm making a point. Olivier Oba Mercier, Davi Ramos, Matt Frivola, so you can missed weight for the Frivola fight. Finishes Christos Yagos in the first round, finishes Joel Alvarez in the second round, loses to Gamrot, then he decisions Demiris Magulov, and here stops Joaquim Silva. That's respectable. Those are good names to have on your resume. And here's the problem. You can argue which of his best 2 wins are either Demiris Magulov, who is going to have like one more fight and then retire, or Joel Alvarez, who I'm not here to poke fun at Joel Alvarez. He's a big guy, and he's 6'2" and fights at lightweight. He had a 4-fight winning streak in the UFC before he fought Saryukian. Been out for over a year, though. Supposed to fight, actually upcoming later this year, okay. Um, Alvarez is a good fighter, but Saryukian hasn't had that, like... He's had good performances, but he's not really... His best opponents in the UFC are his 2 losses, is maybe the best way to phrase this. Islam Makhachev and Mateusz Gamrot are hands down the best guys he's fought. And he was in those fights, but he lost. It might... He might... If he were to fight either Dariush or Chandler, I think he would be in those fights as well. He might even win. I might favor him over Chandler. I might. I have to think about that one. But there's just... He was so good against that lower than elite level of competition that he wound up fighting the elites probably before it would have benefited his skill development. Again, this is stuff he can still work on, so I don't know. Maybe I'm just spitballing here, but I don't know. That's just it's something that kind of struck me watching this fight. Like, there's still an unrefined element to parts of his game that you really don't want to see in a top 10 lightweight. That doesn't mean you have to be world class at everything, but everything should form a cohesive unit, right? If you look at, I'm going to bring up both, you can do Oliveira too. Like, if you look at Khabib or Makhachev or Oliveira, none of them are, again, they're not lights out everywhere. Khabib's striking was, if you took it just for the sake of it's on its own, was not great, but it served his MMA game, was designed to. Makhachev's striking is actually pretty good, but it's designed to service his overall vision of how he fights. Charles Oliveira has deficiencies in his game. His defense is still a little suspect. He's way too happy to be on his back for long periods of time. His takedown game is actually pretty weak if he can't get to a clinch. I'm nitpicking here. Like, the dude's one of the best lightweights in the world. So when I say that, that's kind of making the point. Even those with those deficiencies, it all harmonizes in his game. Right? Like, his defense is a little bit lacking, partially because he is so offensively potent. He doesn't have great shots from the outside because he'd rather fight his way into a clinch. His clinch game is pretty darn good. Both takedowns and just, landing knees and elbows. It all harmonizes, right? Saryukian has a lot of exceptional tools, and his wrestling is an exceptional tool. But I don't think he's really got everything. I don't think he's quite got everything integrated the way you would like. 29 years old. Plenty of other fighters that same age have that same issue. Just noting it, because I got to talk about something related to the fight. Silva, that guy he didn't stay active enough. I remember his debut, because he's debuted for the UFC in 2015. He's been there a while. He just doesn't have a lot of fights. He fought once in 15, once in 16, once in 17, twice in 18, once in 19, not at all in 20, once in 21, once in 22. This is his first fight of 23. He's just not active. And that's kind of the biggest drawback, because he has another guy with some good tools. Middleweight, Armen Petrosyan defeated Christian Leroy Duncan via unanimous decision, 130-27, 229-28. A pretty good outing from Petrosyan. Duncan, I'm glad he had this experience at this point in his UFC career. He's one of those big guys with pretty good power, good kicks, but he got by on the regional scene on the physical attributes rather than technical acumen. And that's fine, but that stops working. Especially when you get to the UFC. You can no longer lean on those things. And Petrosyan kind of showed him that. Like, yeah, you're a big guy and you've got flashy kicks. Okay, what if they don't land? And this was not a blowout fight for Petrosyan, but he stuck to fundamentals, and he kinda audited what Duncan was doing, and found it wanting. So, if Duncan learns the appropriate lessons from this, he's still a pretty big guy, and he's got the wingspan on Duncan is enormous. I mean, he had like 8 inches of reach on Petrosyan, which is a heck of a thing. But you got to be able to use it. So if he takes the lesson, there's still a pretty good upside for him. Petrosyan wants to move on to fighting more recognizable opponents. I think that's probably about due for him. He's, I think, 3-1 in the UFC. Yeah, how he's looked, I'm not saying anyone ranked necessarily, but give him more recognizable names. I think that's due. Featherweight, Pat Sabatini defeated Lucas Almeida via arm triangle, 148 of the second. Sabatini, he was coming off of that rough loss to Damon Jackson, who Jackson kind of just ran him over, didn't he? Yeah, it was like 1 minute and 9 seconds, and Jackson just hammered him out. He looked okay here. He looked more like himself. Good forward pressure, pretty good takedowns, good passing game. His ground and pound, it was present. Would like to see more of it. And it cut the arm triangle late, kind of in transition. So, good bounce back win for Sabatini. He kind of needed that after the Jackson fight. Lightweight, oh good grief, Manuel Torres knocked Nicholas Mata into next week with an elbow, 150, of the first round. Open stance fighters, Torres fighting southpaw. Gets outside foot position, steps deep, elbowed right down the pipe. Mata fell like Somebody said he looked like a video game, like ragdoll video game physics. Boom, dropped onto his side. Um, Wonderful knockout if you like the violence, and y'all know I like the violence. Uh, yeah, really good finish from Torres. Welterweight, Nicholas Dalby defeated Muslim Salikov via unanimous decision, 230 27s, 129 28. Pretty good fight from Dalby. He was on the wrong end of most of the first round. You could have given that to Salikov, I think. I gave it to Dalby because in the closing bit, he landed a flush head kick that almost knocked Salikov down. And while Salikov had kind of, I thought the other round was his to that point, and I don't even disagree with you giving it to him. Might have just been the angle I was looking at the time with that head kick from Dalby and some of the follow-ups, but I thought it was enough for Dalby to kind of overtake. That said, that first round you could legitimately score it either way. I'm not complaining. Rounds 2 and 3, a lot more from Dalby. Some pretty good body work, good pressure, good physicality, clinches, takedowns, some work on top. Really solid overall performance out of Dalby here. Good win for him. Very good win. That was the main card. On the prelims, Alessandro Costa defeated Jimmy Flick via TKO, elbows, 103 of the second. Costa just crippled Flick with calf kicks and then got on top and kind of pounded him out. Pretty good win for Costa. Bantamweight, Kyung Ho Kong defeated Christian Quinones via rear naked choke, 225 of the first. So Quinones hurts Kong. Gets him backing up, but he thinks Kong is hurt more than he is, and comes in looking to swing and finish, and Mr. Perfect there, Kyung Ho Kong, cracks him with a left hand, right hook, drops him, gets on top, starts working, gets to the back, choke, dunzo. Good win for Kong. Good win for Kong. Flyweight, Carlos Hernandez, defeated Dennis Bondar via technical decision, unanimous. 30-27, 30-27, 29-28. 4:59 of the third. So, couple of things about this. At the end of the second round, Bondar kind of tossed Hernandez away from a takedown attempt, where he got up from under him. Hernandez was on his knees. Bondar threw a punch, then walked closer to him and kneed him in the head. Now, originally when looking at this, I didn't know what he was doing. I thought you'd need the guy in the head. Now, on replay, look, there is no doubt about the knee hitting the head. Okay, that's not in dispute here. What it looks more like happened is Bondar was throwing a roundhouse to the shoulder or the arm. And the shin glanced off of Hernandez's arm and shoulder, and because of the angle, it kind of meant the knee went into the head. Again, that's kind of what it looked like. It was right at the end of the round. It was just a weird thing. No point was taken. I kind of think there should have been a point taken there, personally. I'm aware that not all instances of knees to the head of a downed opponent are created equal. If the other guy is flat out on his knees and you walk up to him and throw that, yeah, that's kind of on you entirely. You can see the whole thing. This isn't one of those instances where you've got a rear waist lock against the fence, and because of the angle your head's at, you can't tell if one of their hands is down. This wasn't that. So, no point taken, though. All right. Third round, Hernandez has done really good work pretty much the whole fight. Sharp counterboxing, pretty good elbows at times. He cut Bondar up a fair bit. So our closing bit here, they wind up clinched. Hernandez gets a body lock and gets a body lock takedown reminiscent of a few that you've probably seen before, like the one that might come easiest to maybe two. Um, when Tito Ortiz stopped Evan Tanner, and then the other one that was kind of similar to this, I think. Frank Shamrock had one where he stopped a guy with a slam. I forget who. So I believe it was some Russian gentleman. And he hits this slam, comes up and just elbows the heck out of Bondar. I mean, just brutal. He's already out. Like the slam essentially knocks out Bondar. Referee steps in, then says he wants to look at the replay in case there was a clash of heads on the takedown. And here's the thing. He rules that there was, and that's why we got a technical decision instead of a stoppage win for Hernandez. I do not agree with the referee here at all. I'm not saying there was no bits of head-to-head contact here. I'm saying, one, Dominic Cruz brought this up on commentary, actually. You don't know if the slam knocked him out or... And the head clash here was very minimal. Now, sometimes that's all it takes. I'm not saying that it couldn't have. I'm saying I've also seen slams that are... You've seen slams where heads really bang together. This wasn't that. But you can't actually tell if the legal technique didn't just knock him out and kind of the heads were incidental and didn't affect anything, which is just penalizing the guy for doing the slam. Second, and Hernandez was pretty vocal about this. If you watch any amateur wrestling match where they do this takedown, they do it pretty much exactly like he did. I know we don't want headbutts. Okay? I get it. There does come a point, though, when you just have to accept that some of this stuff is in play. And to me, if your heads bang together on a takedown, especially if it's smaller like this one, that's just how the game is played. Right? I mean, it just seems weird to me that we're over-analyzing this now. Again, I am not in favor of headbutts. I actually didn't hate the referee saying I want to make sure this was a clean. I want to make sure there was no bad headbutting. I don't hate that. I hate that he looked at what happened and went, this rises to the level of taking away the stoppage from this guy. And I don't like that this sport might be going in that direction. So I think it was a bad call from the ref, straight up. I think it was a bad call. I think it was Jaron Vallel. So between not taking the point in the second round, the really slow move to stop this when Bondar is unconscious, getting elbowed in the face repeatedly. Like there were 3 or 4 shots that he did not need to take, my man. You botched this pretty badly. And then to top it off, you make that weird call. Again, I didn't love it. Hernandez, let me just take half a step back from that and say Carlos Hernandez looked pretty darn good. Smooth on the feet, good footwork, good counters, fast hands. He looked real good. I give him all the credit in the world. I understand his being pissed about this. I would be too. I think it's a bad call by the ref. I think that thing happens all the. If that's amateur wrestling is relatively um, pedantic's not the right word. It implies too much, but amateur wrestling is pretty. They're willing to get in the weeds on some of their rules. If you're now calling for a foul on a pure wrestling move that even in a wrestling ring everyone would kind of shrug. On the wrestling mat, I should say mat rather than ring, in case you get the wrong idea about which wrestling I'm referring to. We're like a bridge too far here, people. Okay? Somewhat inherent to MMA is this. That this stuff does just happen on occasion, and it's part of the buy-in. Um, who is it I heard? I think Luke Thomas has relayed this story. That years ago, there was some discussion about scoring in MMA, and maybe we should systematize it more. Maybe we should develop point criteria for takedowns the way wrestling does, or something more specific for knockdowns like boxing. And I think it was Jeff Blatnick, part of the response that was given when asked about this was, to do that would be to take away some of the essence of MMA. I think that's true. Maybe at some point in the future, someone will find the right way to score MMA. They will have the right criteria. They will set that up, and we will get the right rule set. And at some point in the future, we will figure that out, right? At some point, maybe. But until then, trying to get too in the weeds in this stuff does kind of take away from the appeal and the spirit of what mixed martial arts fighting is. And I think that's where we landed here. So I feel bad for Hernandez. Should be a stoppage win for him. Women's flyweight, Teresa Bleda defeated Gabriela Fernandez via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards. Fernandez has some decent kickboxing, but she gets taken down way too easy and she cannot get up. And that's where we found ourselves. Bantamweight, this was weird. Dan Argueta defeated Ronnie Lawrence fought to a no contest. 220 of the first. This sucked for everybody. Argueta looked pretty darn good. He was out wrestling Lawrence. We got the no contest because Lawrence is trying to fight up from under Argueta. Argueta moves to a front headlock, threatens a guillotine. They roll through. He threatens an anaconda. They roll through. He threatens a dar. It's like he's working a front headlock series. He rolls back to full mount with the guillotine. And he's working it. He's tightening it. He's adjusting. Lawrence on his back, he's in a bad spot. His right hand is up kind of by Argueta's hip, thinking about tapping. He's not, but he's thinking about it. He's aware of the bad spot he's in. And Argueta's trying to crank the choke, and the referee, this would have been Keith Peterson, he reaches to check the hand of Ronnie Lawrence. You kind of grab it and shake it, make sure there's still resistance there. I think he thought there had been kind of a tap before when there hadn't. And I don't want to bag on him too much for this because, let me just phrase it this way. He's on the same side. He's on Ronnie Lawrence's right. So he's by the hand that's in question. He also, from that angle, can't really see Lawrence's face. I think if he could, you could see that he's not unconscious. Like, he's not even close. I mean, again, there is a choke in. It is in a bad spot, and it could get to a point where he has to tap. But he's not out. And as Peterson checks the hand, Lawrence goes to give resistance. He pushes the hand away, he pushes back into it. That's what he's trying to do. Peterson pushes the hand. As Lawrence pushes back into him, Peterson moves his hand, and as a result of just the momentum generated, he winds up kind of hitting Agreda in the thigh, on the hip. And Peterson reads this as a submission. He stops the fight. Lawrence immediately protests. To the credit of all parties involved, they check the replay, and Peterson comes up and says, yeah, I screwed that up. Hence, no contest. You know, I'm going to quote, again, Grabaka Hitman on this one. There's some Russian MMA federations that have the kind of the standing policy in place of, if this happens, we just restart the fight. I would like that. Argueda was doing good. It sucks for him because he was winning this. We're only 2.5. We're not even halfway through the first round. Okay, could have gone a variety of ways. That 220 was pretty much all him. Not 10-8 territory necessarily, but he was the one in control. He was the one forcing the issue. Like his fight to that point, no question. So it sucks for him that a potential win gets mucked up. Sucks for Lawrence to be deprived of the opportunity to fight out of a bad position, which he might have. Dude, that choke might have got cinched up a little tighter, and then he taps. He might have got out of it and then still been in a bad position. He might have come back in rounds 2 and 3 to win. We'll never know. So sucks for him, and it sucks for both guys that the UFC's pay structure is what it is. And I don't mean percentage-wise. I mean the show-win split is at this point archaic and borderline punitive, and I've made my case that should go away before. So that sucks. Bad call by the ref. You just not a good call. He was. What was the other one? Was he the? Yeah, I think Peterson refed the Saryukian and Silva fight and was slightly slow on that stoppage, I thought. Not the worst. Put it this way. I probably would have stopped it 2 or 3 hammer fists before he did, but it wasn't. Look, I clearly didn't get up in arms over it, and I have in the past over bad stoppages. So that was unfortunate for both guys. Yeah, just sucks all around. And kicking everything off, Modestas Bukauskas defeated Zach Paunga via unanimous decision, 229-28 and a 30-27. Yet giving Bukauskas the second round is like the worst scorecard of the night. Who did that? Actually, wasn't D'Amato or Cleary. It was Anthony Menes. Not his finest night. Media scores mostly for Paunga. Interesting. I scored this for Bukauskas. Majority were 29-28 Paunga. That said, this probably hinges on the third. I think for most people. Is it the first for most people? I actually don't. That's weird. Like I've held a different opinion from the majority of media outlets before. I'm curious to see how they. I thought, is it the first? I thought Bukauskas said the first. And Paunga the second. I thought Bukauskas said the third. I'm not quite sure. My hunch is most of the media outlets who did score 29-28 for Paunga also, like said, whatever round in question swung it for them was close. So, yeah, I think technically Paunga had a numerical edge in all 3 rounds. Let me double check this. The totals per round. Yeah, Ponga technically outlanded him all 3 rounds. Here's kind of the problem. Um, or was it round? No, no, it was round 2. That was the wonky one. Ponga had 204 of control in the first, but he got hurt. He got hurt late in that round, and it was enough for I thought Bukowskis to take it. I think everyone else agreed. Round 2, Ponga out. He lands more. I don't know. Round 2, I gave it to Ponga. Round 3, Ponga lands 5 more significant strikes. The total strikes were dead even. A little more control time for Bukowskis. Yeah, I have no problem with Bukowskis getting this one. I don't know. I don't agree with him getting the second round. Like, that's my big thing here. Is 30-27 for him seems very wrong. But anyway, that was the event. It was what it was. Your fight of the night I mentioned, Cannonier and Vettori. 1,000,000% deserved. Performances went to Manuel Torres for that elbow from hell, and then Alessandro Costa. Real shame that Hernandez didn't get one. That poor guy, man. He turned in a really good performance, and unfortunately got not going to be rewarded as maybe it should have been. All right, if you want my full report for that event, it is up in the MMA Zone of 411mania.com. In the MMA Zone, go give it a read. I appreciate it. All right, let's move on. UFC on ESP, excuse me, UFC on ABC 5. This comes your way Saturday, June 24th, and has a start time. Let's see if they've settled this. Because I believe the main card starts at 3. Yeah, so the prelims are going to start at 11. Are listed currently. It's starting at 11:30 Eastern. It's 9:30 in the morning for me on a Saturday. I am glad there was a chance I had something else that might have come up, but it would have been early morning, and this is early morning for me. 'Cause that's 9:30 in the morning for me. Yeah, so. Well, I'll have the evening free, at least. So, for those of you anywhere around the world, again, morning slash early afternoon, depending on where you are specifically for that event. So, keep that in mind if you want to watch live or follow along. All right. Main event. Josh Emmett, Ilia Topuria. Love the fight. Emmett coming off of that loss, man, he got kind of carved up by Yair Rodriguez before the triangle choke. Had a good winning streak going before that. I mean, he had a tough split decision loss at lightweight in his third UFC fight. He dropped to featherweight, won a couple of fights, got brutally knocked out by Jeremy Stephens. Jeremy Stephens broke his face. And that's not a joke, like, broke his face. He recovered, he came back, he knocked out Michael Johnson. He was losing that fight before he landed that. Beat Mirsad Bektic, beat Shane Burgos, that was a good fight, beat Dan Ige. Had that split win over Calvin Kattar that I thought he lost, then had the interim title fight with Rodriguez that he lost. How old is Emmett? 38. 38 at featherweight's pretty old. Topuria is only 26. A 12-year age gap. Good grief. Ilia Topuria undefeated, 13-0. 5-0 in the UFC. 4 of those finishes. Knocked out Damon Jackson, knocked out Ryan Hall, knocked out Jai Herbert, brutalized Bryce Mitchell before choking him out with an arm triangle. This is a pretty big step up for him. Emmett is much more seasoned than Bryce Mitchell was. Emmett is rugged, power puncher, fought the best. So this is a pretty decent step up for Topuria. If Topuria wins, it's hard to say that will get him a title shot because it's featherweight. And Max Holloway's still around. We don't quite know what's going to happen between Yair Rodriguez and Alexander Volkanovski. That said, like a Topuria win here would put him in line for it. He'd certainly be in the conversation. Emmett's a good wrestler, but he doesn't wrestle a lot. He does a lot of the old He's a lot of the wrestle boxing without much of the wrestling these days. And he's got heavy hands, man. But he's another one of those guys who just gets damaged. Like Rodriguez put damage on him. Calvin Kattar put damage on him. And to his credit, he persevered in both those cases as long as he could. I think he'll try to wrestle Topuria a bit, but I'm not saying Josh Emmett can't win this. Ilia Topuria hits very hard. Both these guys hit very hard. Emmett's the better pure wrestler, but I wonder if Topuria's scrambles aren't better. Curious to see Topuria over potentially 5 rounds because we've seen Emmett do it. I don't know, man. Emmett's lack of defense is a problem. It got him in trouble against Kattar. It got him in trouble against Rodriguez. I think it's going to get him in trouble here. I'm going to pick Topuria, but it's a great fight. Co-main event, Amanda Hebos and Macy Barber. I can't speak for anyone else. I can only speak for myself. I do not care. I don't know. Look, she's had a couple of. Macy Barber has won a couple of fights in her current winning streak that I thought she lost. I was pretty sure that Miranda Maverick had beaten her. I think I scored the fight with I can't remember how I scored the fight with Andrea Lee. But Barber is just she's kind of fizzled for me. Hebos came into the UFC and had a pretty good run, and then she had some setbacks. She's coming off a win over Viviane Araújo, but we're back at flyweight. My hunch is Barber probably gets another decision that she maybe shouldn't. I think kind of my hunch. These are two fighters that are younger, have relatively good have like bubbly personalities. They're very effusive, and the UFC kind of wants to be better than they are. I mean, if you look at Macy Barber's early run in the UFC, she talked a giant game and then had setbacks, and it's kind of just is what it is with her at this point. One of the lines, especially after the last couple of fights that came out, was Erin Blanchfield is everything Macy Barber claimed that Barber was. I think that's accurate. So I think I'm going to lean towards Barber here, but I don't have a lot of enthusiasm for this fight. Next up, middleweights, Cody Brundage and Sadiquas Dumas? Get how he pronounces that. Forgive me. Let me double check what we've got for these two. So, Brundage. He's been up and down. 2-3 in the UFC on a 2-fight losing streak. I mean, Mikhail Oleksiejczuk and then Rodolfo Vieira, so pretty decent talent there. I'm going to go with Dumas at the moment because I believe that's how he pronounces it. He lost his UFC debut. I don't know. I'm going to lean towards Brundage just a little bit, but I don't know. I don't know about that one. David Onama and Gabriel Santos. I think this is Onama. He's what, 2-1 in the UFC? 2-2. Oh, right. He lost to Nate Landwehr. I almost forgot that fight happened. Um, well, he's been out. Yeah, he had a couple of fights fall out. Anyway, Santos is 10-1. He also lost his UFC debut. Yeah, against Lerone Murphy. Yeah, I think that's Onama, but not by a huge margin. Let's see, Brendan Allen and Bruno Silva. Ooh. Why isn't this higher? Maybe you want to get the main card off with a bang. You need the hot opener for the main card, but this is a good fight, actually. Brendan Allen has only had 2 losses in the UFC. One of those to Sean Strickland, the other to Chris Curtis. He's on a 4-fight winning streak. The last, 3 of those have been finishes. Coming off, the current streak, he beat Sam Alvey at light heavyweight. Beat Jacob Malkoun. That was a one-off. He's a middleweight. Then last 2 fights, he stopped both Krzysztof Jotko and Andrew Muniz. The Muniz win was big. I thought he was going to lose that one. He seems to be doing pretty good. And then Bruno Silva is... he's had some tough fights in the UFC. He was looking pretty darn good, and then he ran into Alex Pereira. Gerald Meerschaert beat him after that. He did win his last one, though. Oh, yeah, when he stopped Brad Tavares. It's a pretty good win for him. This is a pretty good fight. I'm going to lean towards Allen. I think he's starting to roll. I think he might be ready for, again, might be ready for something there. But that's a pretty good fight. On the prelims, let's see. Neil Magny will fight Philip Rowe. I don't have a great reason to pick against Neil Magny here, and I kind of need a reason. Magny just exists. I'm going to give the man credit for sticking around forever. Like, his UFC debut was back in 2013. February. Yeah, he's over 20 years. He's over 10 years. 20. He's over 10 years in the UFC. That is hard to do. And he's never been top of the heap. But he's had some good fights. He's had some good wins. At the moment, he is the gatekeeper at middleweight. Welterweight. He is the gatekeeper at welterweight. He's the most decision wins in UFC history at 13. He's a tough fighter to beat, man. People have started to figure him out a little bit. He's coming off that loss to Gilbert Burns, and he hadn't had a losing streak since 2013, so dude's almost 10 years without back-to-back losses. It was in November of 13, so... And he's trying to avoid that here. Gilbert Burns kind of ran him over that last fight. Beat Daniel Rodriguez before that. Then before that, Shavkat Rakhmonov got him good. Because, Rakhmonov, dude, that guy might be wearing gold sooner rather than later. I'm a pretty big believer in Rakhmonov. But anyway, Rowe, on a 3-fight winning streak. Missed weight twice at welterweight. Good grief. Yeah, again, I need a good reason to pick against Neil Magny, and I'm not saying Rowe's incapable of winning this, but I do not see a compelling reason to pick him here. Flyweight, Zhalgas Zhumagulov and Joshua Van. Van, I do not recognize that flag. Oh, Myanmar. Okay. I believe he would be the first, what do they call themselves? Myanmarese? He's the first fighter from Myanmar to make his way to the UFC, is my hunch. First I can remember. He's a pretty good action fighter on a good winning streak. Um, yeah, Zhumagulov, that poor guy. 1-5 in the UFC. His last two fights have been split decisions that he probably should have won. I, I'm pretty sure I scored the Jeff Molina fight for him. That one I'm not as sure about. I know. I thought he beat Charles Johnson. I kind of. I might have scored the Albazi fight for him. I'd have to double check that one. But that guy has had some real bad luck. Um, I don't know if that doesn't continue here. Van is. I. Zhumagulov is the safe pick, so that's where I'm going to lean, but Van might well take this. Heavyweights. Austin Lane and Justin Taffa. Lane is he making his UFC debut? He is. Another one of these former football player. Okay, he lost to Greg Hardy on the Contender Series in 2018. Credit to him though, he stuck with it. He suffered a loss after that, couple of wins. Loss. He's currently on a 6-fight winning streak. The best name on that list, probably Juan Adams. All right, fair enough. Taffa. He's won his last two. Oh yeah, he missed. Remember when he missed heavyweight? First guy ever to do it. Um, yeah, he beat Hunsucker, he beat Porter. I feel like I should pick Taffa here, so I'm going to. But that's, lower level heavyweight, so insanity might happen. Welterweights, Randy Brown and Wellington Turman. Yeah, Brown had a 4-fight winning streak snapped when he ran into Jack Della Maddalena, and JDM ran him over pretty good. Turman's a guy. There's a lot. He's intermittently had buzz, but he's got a losing UFC record. Yeah, I think I'm going with Brown, but again, Turman's one of the. Let me tell you what Turman is. Turman's one of those guys that everyone who's worked with him and trained with him sings his praises, but he kind of struggles to put it together in the cage. Lightweights, Mateusz Rebecki and Loki Radzhabov. Let's see here. I gotta double check this one. Rebecki had a pretty surprising win in his UFC debut when he beat Nick Fiore. That was a bonkers fight. He fought like a bat out of hell. He's on a what overall winning streak? Overall record -3. So 14 in a row. That's nothing to sneeze at. Loic Radzhabov. No, yeah, I believe this was our first Tajikistan fighter in the UFC. Because he won. I want to say it was him. Anyway, he beat Esteban Ribovic earlier this year. He's only lost recently. Let's see. Yeah, again, he's won his last two. I think I'm going to lean towards Rebecki here. But that fight, that could be a little crazy. Circle that one if you're looking for sleepers, like sleeper fights to watch. That one might be there. Strawweight, Tabitha Ricci and Jillian Robertson. Bit of a step up for Ricci here. She's never lost at strawweight. Coming off a win over Jessica Penne, she's got a really good jiu-jitsu background. And Robertson will accommodate her in that respect. I don't know. It's a little bit tougher than you might think. Let me lean towards Ricci, but no, I'm going to lean towards Robertson. Here's why. Robertson is more willing to inflict harm. Like she's got nasty. I don't know. This really might come down to who gets takedowns. Robertson's got some nasty elbows when she lets them go. Ricci's probably got a little bit more power on the feet though. Yeah, actually I think I am going to lean towards Ricci, but I don't know. That's a fairly well-matched fight. Lightweights, Trevor Peek and Jose Mariscal. Mariscal? Alright, what do we got here? I believe 2 debutantes. No, Peek's fought in the UFC before. When? February. Which event was that, out of idle curiosity? Crown 11 Span. Okay. I'd explain why I don't remember it. I don't remember much about that card. Peek has had a couple of fights fall through. Mariscal, I believe this is his debut. Yes. Won his last 3. His losses are troubling, though. Losses to Joe Anderson Brito, Steve Garcia, Sean Soriano, Burger Gillespie, Bryce Mitchell. Jeez. Like, the guys he's lost to, I know. Let's lean towards Peak, but I'm not sure about that. Let's see. Featherweight, Jamal Emmers and Jack Jenkins. Emmers. Been up and down in the UFC, 2-2. Losses to Giga Chikadze and Pat Sabatini. Wins over Vince Cachero and Husseini Ashkabov. Not terribly. I mean, like the 2 he's lost to are 2 good fighters, and the 2 guys he beat are guys maybe barely UFC caliber, so that doesn't actually tell you a whole lot. Jenkins 11-2, won his UFC debut. He actually looked pretty good in that fight that he won on the 284 card. He's on a good overall winning streak, actually. What, 8 fights in a row. That is nothing to sneeze at, as the phrase goes. I actually do think I'm going to lean towards Jenkins here just a bit. And kicking everything off because the UFC hates flyweights, Tatsuro Taira and Cledson Rodriguez. If you listen to this show for any length of time, you know I have been expounding the the potential of Tatsuro Taira for a little bit here. I don't mean to say that Cledson Rodriguez is some kind of bum. He is most certainly not. But I have no problem picking Taira here. Just put it like that. So that's the event. Saturday morning. Come see me over in the MMA Zone of 411mania.com, and I'll have you covered start to finish. Alrighty, let us move on, because we have to talk about Conor McGregor, don't we? Alright. So, Conor McGregor. I mentioned this last week, actually, I think a little bit, that he was involved in a skit at during a timeout or a commercial break for game 4 or 5 of the NBA Finals. I forget which game. Forgive me, I haven't watched a lot of basketball. They were in Miami, and he was in a skit where he punched out the mascot, and then he like did a follow-up punch that looked like it was, I think, was unplanned and kind of caught the guy in the costume off guard. But it's just a stupid little thing. Doesn't actually matter that much. What matters is now in the wake of that event, someone came out and alleged that Conor McGregor sexually assaulted her at this basketball game. Okay. She also claimed that the Miami Heat, the like building security, was complicit in this, and so long story short here, um, when you accuse the not just people get this wrong all the time, like the team, like the organization for the Miami Heat is it's not just the team. It's not just the players. It's not even just the coaches. There's the coaches, the trainers, equipment managers, building staff, maintenance, security, like all that falls under the umbrella of the ownership of the team. When you accuse an organization like that of something, they're going to look into it very seriously. So the Miami Heat are looking into these allegations. The NBA is now going to look into them because you've accused one of their relatively major franchises of serious issues. So they're going to look into this. So there's a lot going on here, and a lot of different parties are going to be looking into this. There was a lot of security there. This is an NBA Finals game. There was a lot of cameras. One of them caught what appears to be the following. You can find the video online. TMZ had it. Pretty much any MMA site is going to have it up. So if you want to go find the video for yourself, please do. That shows Conor in a VIP area, very crowded. He goes up and he takes a woman by the hand and leads her into this private area restroom. Again, a lot of people around. This is not a private act. This is not the back alley of some. A lot of people saw this. Apparently, there were a lot of people present. Certainly, the video evidence shows that conclusively, rather. Sorry, excuse me. So here's also kind of the problem. Some of the reaction to this has been as follows. Well, the last bit of information related to this before I get into my opinion. Seems there's other video of Conor and the alleged victim out at a club together after the game, so hours after the alleged incident took place. I am not going to comment on the veracity of the allegations. There is nowhere near enough evidence for me to draw anything approximating a reasonable conclusion. I'm going to leave that aside for the moment. So, let's talk about Conor for just a second here. Without levying my own opinion, would anyone be surprised if Conor was guilty of the accusations? At this point, you can't be surprised given his track record. He's been accused of some form of sexual assault twice before. Then there was that incident on the yacht where a woman had to flee. This guy is a little off the rails. Now, so Now, look, McGregor denies any impropriety took place. In fact, his lawyer indicated that they view this as a shakedown. Here's my other thing about this. Are wealthy, famous personalities targets for false accusations for shakedowns like this, allegedly like this? Yeah, they are. There's no two ways about that. If you are wealthy and if you are famous, there are going to be people out there trying to get you into a position to make you part with your money. That's just how it is. I don't know that that's what happened here. There's a very easy way for Conor to have avoided this entire thing, mind you. And it goes a little bit as follows. You're married with a child. What are you doing taking a random woman into a bathroom with you? Like that, you only do that for one thing, right? Like, even if no crime was committed by Conor McGregor, if we step off to the world where, into the reality where this is a spurious accusation brought on by nothing but greed. Not saying I think that's what happened, but let's live in that world for just a second. My man, you opened yourself up to this. You did this. You should not put yourself in this position. And I try real hard not to preach at you guys here. I have my worldview, I have my religious beliefs, and you have yours. And to the extent that my religious outlook on life is relevant to what we're discussing, it occasionally comes up. For the most part, it's not relevant to the discussion. So when I say that when I say I take a dim view of extramarital conduct in this respect, yeah, that's my religious sensibilities talking. And that said, you also have to have some sense of risk management here at some point just for your personal well-being. You know, I forget who it was. Forgive me. There was a politician a few years ago. This might actually have been Pence, former Vice President Mike Pence. It might have been him. Don't quote me on this. I forget the context here, and I forget who said it. But there was a relatively prominent politician here in the United States who said, I won't even have solo dinner with another woman who is not my wife. Unless someone else, like, if I'm out and I have dinner if there's another woman that is not my wife is present, or like, I think that was the gist of it. Like, my wife is there. And he got mocked for this. I recall this vividly. I recall vividly that this individual, and again, I want to say it was Pence, but it might not have been, so forgive me if I'm misremembering who said it. Like, the more I think about it, the more I think it wasn't him, and it doesn't matter. It's the sentiment I'm talking about. He was mocked for this, pretty thoroughly. And this was a little bit before, I want to say this was a little bit before the Me Too breakout, right? It's amazing to me how many people will mock and belittle values and standards that they consider pointless, old-fashioned, whatever, until they are forcibly reminded of why those exist. It's all well and good. Look, man, am I saying that every married man who ever has a has dinner with a woman other than his wife is somehow violating the vows of marriage. No, I'm not. No reasonable person is. But this is just the but here, man. And it's for the record, like I I don't think it's I personally find that standard a little on the extreme side for my taste. Yeah, I do. Not how I not how I would live my life in all probability. Not married yet, would like to be someday. And if I ultimately decide that if my wife and I were to decide that that's, the most reasonable thing for both of us to do as far as the standard goes, then so be it. But at the moment, sitting here, do I think, not being able to just have a friendly dinner with a female friend, is that a little bit weird? Yeah, I do. I think that's a little bit, little off too far on that side for me. Thanks. But even if you think that's slightly weird and, well, you should, or whatever, consider the fact that it more or less completely inoculates you from this kind of thing. If you're, I mean, that, when I say this kind of thing, there's an implication there that this is, again, somewhat fraudulent, somewhat a shakedown. I don't know that to be the case. Given Connor's history, it would not shock me if he did commit some kind of inappropriate, borderline illegal act, or actually illegal act. So when I say it inoculates you against this, that if you did nothing wrong, then having another witness there with you will largely settle this issue. Connor choosing to engage somewhat random individuals for, again, if you, as a man, especially in like a VIP setting, take a woman into the bathroom with you, you're either buying drugs and you don't want to do it out in public, or there's some kind of sexual encounter happening. There's not really a lot of in between here. Like, that's kind of it. That's the intent. That's what's gonna happen. And one of the other reactions to all this that I found a little bit interesting, and this is just perspective difference. I saw this on Twitter. I forget who said it, so forgive me. But the gist of this was, after the video came out, was like, men. So he didn't force her. Women. Why is he engaging in extramarital activity, sexual activities? Let me just state this for the record. The vast majority of men take a very dim view of sexual assault. The vast majority of us. We do ask men about it, and you'll get a pretty uniform response. Most of us have very, very strong feelings about people who do this kind of thing. And they're not good feelings. But we are also, men in general, I'm going to speak broadly, cognizant of legal ramifications for saying, for the accusation in play. You say, so-and-so assaulted me. We take that seriously, but we do need evidence. And that has to be settled. The legal side of this thing, more or less, has to be settled before we look at the purely ethical or moral side of things. Look, because extramarital sexual contact is, I take a dim view of it personally. My religion takes a pretty dim view of it. But I'm not here to preach, and it's not illegal. It's not. Sorry, people. It's not illegal to cheat on your spouse. I think it's icky At a bare minimum, I think it's, again, there's moral issues. I think it contributes to the decay of society. I'll rant at you if you want about why I think that's a bad thing to do. It is not illegal. It is not assault or sexual assault or rape and I have to kind of separate those by degrees because rape is sexual assault, but not necessarily all sexual assault is rape. And then there's some people who just struggle with the differentiation between. Again, man, I take a very dim view of sexual assault. I think it's one of the worst things a human being can do to another human being. Period. And that's part of the reason I think a lot of men are very like, especially if it's not anyone we know, like if there's not an emotional response to it as on an individual level, we want to be sure. And then once we're sure, like we'll stomp you into the ground and potentially if necessary. Like that's just how men are. Good men at least. But we do have to kind of be sure about this. And again, like, well, that was sexual assault. Well, can you be a little more specific? Because we've reached a point in the use of that phrase where it can mean a whole lot of different things. Everything from, again, violent rape to there were people claiming that like I had bad sex and I regret it, or there was a school of thought for a little bit that I don't know if this is still prevalent. A man like initiating a kiss, like not forcing the kiss, but like leaning in to initiate the motion, and then even stopping if you say stop, it's still a version of sexual assault. And like most rational people, I would like to think, would understand these are not the same thing. I'm not saying that having someone lean in for a kiss that you don't want isn't uncomfortable. I don't know. No one's ever tried to kiss me under those circumstances. But that is not, especially if you say stop or what are you doing and they actually stop, and like if that boundary is respected, you really kind of weren't assaulted. I don't know. My opinion, which is worth, not much. But that's not the same as rape. It's not. Sorry. And so again, men are just like, okay, if she's going willingly with him into the bathroom, that doesn't mean that this still couldn't have turned violent and ugly. It does set something of a tone, though, does it not? And that's really all that's being kind of hashed out there. And I think women are more, broadly speaking, more able to go from, potential assaulter to we disagree with his behavior without settling the first. Like the connective jump between those 2 points, especially about someone you don't like, is made relatively quickly. I think you'd find most men also take a fairly negative view on cheating on your spouse. In this case, it would be wife. But again, we don't view it the same as some form of legitimate sexual assault. And that needs to be settled before, for most of us, settle that. Then we'll talk about, no, you really shouldn't cheat on your wife. Like, but again, Conor just makes bad decisions at this point, man. Again, even if he is completely innocent of everything other than the immoral and I would argue unethical act of infidelity, you still are exposing yourself to this. Like, again, assume for just a second that this is nothing, like, their encounter was purely consensual, and then she basically said, pay me off or I cry rape. The fact that you were willing to put yourself in that position to begin with speaks volumes about your very, 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 very bad decision making. Sir, Please stop. So this is going to get investigated. We're going to find out what happens. Conor has now passed the point by which he must have entered the USADA testing pool if he wanted to fight at all for the UFC in 2023, unless, of course, they give him an exemption, which the UFC can do willy-nilly, so who the heck knows. But at this point, I would go so far as to say if Conor comes back to fight for the UFC, he will not be fighting Michael Chandler. That seems relatively clear at this point. And look, if Conor did assault this woman, criminal charges coming up wouldn't be out of the question. Again, if there was a crime that took place, the police should be involved. He should be prosecuted. Full stop. I don't think people who do that should be part of society. Sue me. But we don't know what's up with Conor exactly going forward. He has once again found himself in a spot of PR and potentially legal trouble. We'll have to see what happens. But again, I feel two things about this that I feel very confident about. One, the UFC is not going to say or do anything other than we're going to let law enforcement and the other entities do what they're going to do, and we'll see what happens, because this is the only thing they ever do. Two, ESPN isn't going to do anything. And I mean anything. They're just going to keep airing The Ultimate Fighter with him on it. Might even hope that his name being more out in public gives it a ratings bump, because nobody cares about the show. That's for darn sure. And if he wants to fight again for the UFC, they will let him. And once again, let me just very briefly, everyone. If you are looking to... How do I phrase this? This is not something I can say without elements of my religious belief kind of bleeding into it, so... The following is advice from a religious person. Feel free to disregard. If you are looking to any worldly entity for worldview, morality, whatever, you will be sorely, catastrophically disappointed over and over and over and over and over again. There's people out there. I saw this on Twitter the other day. Like, if you're not a Dana White fan, you're not an MMA fan. Like, how much of the Kool-Aid have you been drinking, my man? Because put that down. Businesses are not moral entities. This does not mean that there aren't businesses that conduct themselves in a more moral way than others. It means they are not moral entities. Fight promoters, movie studios, comic books, whatever. None of these things are moral entities. They will never guide you to happiness. So if you're looking for the UFC or ESPN or whoever to do the right thing, you're going to be disappointed. Every time, in all of them. Please stop. For your own mental well-being, please stop pretending that these conglomerations of power and money in the earthly sense will provide you anything approximating eternal happiness. They won't. They just won't. All right, on that note, anything else I wanted to say about that? I don't think so. It's a bad spot, man. It's gross. And we'll just have to see what happens. The allegation has been made. Lawyers are involved. Investigations are being had. And I only talked about it because I don't like talking about Conor. it's easy to talk about him like every week as part of the news cycle. I don't like doing that because most of the stuff he does I don't care about. That said, like this is a relatively newsworthy incident, so I felt like I should talk about it a little bit. I don't know. All right, let's move on, shall we? We don't want to be here for too much longer. So to somewhat counteract the news of Conor, the UFC announced several fights. Some of which I like, some of which, yeah. Big one for the UFC's return to Singapore, UFC on ESPN 50 later this year. Main event of Max Holloway and the Korean Zombie Chan Sung Jung. I have ethical concerns about putting the Korean Zombie in the cage with Max Holloway at this point. I have seen the Zombie take some pretty hellacious beatings. He's over it. He's past his prime. And Max Holloway is going to do bad things to him. My sort of caveat to this, and I said this when the Zombie said, I want to fight Max Holloway. Chan Sung Jung has fought two of the three greatest featherweights of all time. He has fought Jose Aldo for the title and lost. He fought Alexander Volkanovski for the title and lost. The only, and I don't count Conor as an all-time great featherweight, for the record. The only great featherweight that he hasn't fought is Max Holloway. And if he wants his retirement fight to be getting in the cage with the other best that he has not yet shared the cage with, I don't like it. I'd rather not see this guy who I've enjoyed a lot of his fights. I'd rather not see him take life-altering damage again. But if this really is his last one and he just kind of wants to check off the last greatest of box that he hasn't yet, I can understand. I may not be the happiest about it, but I can understand it. So moving on from a fight I'm dubious on in some respects to a fight I wholeheartedly endorse. UFC on ESPN Plus 84, main event Corey Sandhagen and Umar Nurmagomedov. Yes. Hook that directly into my veins. Oh, that's a great fight. Big step up for Umar, who has looked every bit the future champion. Sandhagen trying to get another crack at the belt. Sandhagen's a beast. Love that fight. Can't wait for it. Good fight. And I think the last one they announced for the return to France. UFC on ESPN 51 will be headlined by Cyril Gane and Sergey Spivak. Fine enough fight. Gane main evented the debut in France, if you'll recall. Crazy fight. That was his fight with Tai Tuivasa. I think it was like the middle of the second round. The crowd just spontaneously sang the French national anthem. Wild, wild scene. Gane and Spivak's a fine fight. So I don't object to that one. Full card later to come out. Any other fights that kind of got announced recently? Let me just scan real fast here. UFC on ESPN 49, headlined by Vicente Luque and Rafael dos Anjos. Fine. I'm not jumping up and down, but fine. I may have touched on this earlier. If not, I'm gonna. This will be a first time. If I have, then I'm gonna touch on it again. The UFC will be back in London, July 22nd. Main event: Tom Aspinall returning from that injury he suffered to take on Marcin Tybura. Don't hate that. Actually, a decent card. As I look up and down, Paul Craig making his middleweight debut. That's something. That's not the worst card I've ever seen. They have to sell tickets to that one, so of course they put forth effort. At the moment, it still seems like Sterling and O'Malley is on for UFC 292, so at this point, I'm kind of gonna call that announced. I feel like we would have had news by this point if Sterling was gonna have to pull out with the injury he was looking at. we'll see it. We'll still keep an eye on that one to see if it changes, but at the moment it looks like that's going to happen. And 293. No, we don't have much for that. We know it's going to be in Sydney, but we don't have too many other stuff for it. How about? We only know the venue for that one. Okay, yeah, I think that's it for the moment as far as announced fights. So let me check Twitter, see if anything crazy is broken. If not, we will do plugs and get out of here for the week. Nope. Okay, so plugs. What do we get this week? This week. Let's see. Last week there was a review for Transformers: Rise of the Beasts featuring myself, Mark Radulich, and we were supposed to have Jason Teasley. Didn't happen. He had stuff come up. Instead, we had David Wright join us. So the three of us got together and talked about that movie, the Transformers franchise, etc., the usual damn you Hollywood stuff. This Tuesday, you'd think we'd be reviewing The Flash, but we're not. You see, originally, Pixar's Elemental was the only thing coming out this week, so that's what Mark had on the schedule. The Flash was originally supposed to debut next week. They pushed it back to this week, and Mark crossed his arms and pouted and said, I'm not changing the schedule. It's Elemental this week, The Flash the next week, and that's that. So that's what we're doing. We are doing Elemental this week and The Flash next week, and depressing our numbers for Mark's tantrum, I suppose. I can talk crap about him here because I know he doesn't listen to this show. So that's what we're doing. Elemental this week, Flash the week after that. So yeah, be on the lookout for that and my other podcasting stuff. That's all I've got this week is Elemental, so that'll be fun. Seems to be getting good reviews. Unfortunately, Pixar's brand is severely damaged, and if it's fair to complain about the Marvel formula, and it is, it's fair to complain about the Pixar formula. And Pixar's become more than a little formulaic at this point. Also this week, my usual spate of coverage. MLW Fusion will be up on Thursday. WWE SmackDown on Friday. UFC events Saturday morning. And yeah, that's what I got. You might occasionally find me other places. Again, sometimes I get called to cover other things. We just have to see how that goes. But that's the stuff I'm scheduled for. All right, we will be back here next week to review UFC on ABC 5, and we will preview UFC on ESPN 4. Will we? Hang on. Yes, sorry. Math was off there when I saw the dates. And yes, we will be previewing UFC on ESPN 48. Sean Strickland versus Abusapien Magomedov. Also on that card, in theory, Demiris Magulov's final fight. He'll take on Grant Dawson. What else we got there? Anything really good? I don't hate the main event. It's weird matchmaking, but I don't hate it. I like Ismagulov. I'm sad he's going away. Yeah, this is not a card that's going to stand out. Yeah, this is very much a C level. Letter C, not C, not like body of water C. Because sea level Kane was a thing for a while, remember? I bet there's a bunch of you who don't get that joke. I'm old and I've been doing this for way too long. Anyway, it's a third tier card. Gonna call it like I see it, folks. But we'll preview it next week, so hopefully you'll be back. Until then, thank you as always. I appreciate the heck out of you. Stay safe out there and continue to be well, be safe, and behave.